It was an interesting season for Sam Steele as it felt like he both fit everywhere, but also nowhere. We'll evaluate Steele's season, hand out some letter grades, and look at where he stands going forward on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Wild, we welcome you in and hope that you join us throughout the rest of the offseason and beyond. If you are an everydayer who joins each and every single day of the week, we are glad to have you back. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we continue to look at some of the third liners in our player evals. We'll talk Sam Steele today with player grades, as well as looking at his statistical performance. And we will also take a look at how Steele potentially falls into the long-term plans for the Minnesota Wild. My name is Seth Sopal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and it's an interesting year for Sam Steele. Didn't really know what to expect from him coming into the year, but what we did get were several career highs through several offensive categories. Steele, all told, played in 65 games for the Wild, 10 goals, 18 assists. Also was a plus 11 on the season. Had 18 penalty minutes, 9 even strength goals, 1 shorthanded goal. He also had 13 even strength assists, 3 power play assists, 85 shots on goal, shot 11.8%. And in terms of time on ice, 14 minutes, 58 seconds. He also won 48.7% of the faceoffs that he took. 308 faceoff wins, 325 faceoff losses, 15 blocks, 46 hits, 21 takeaways, and 22 giveaways. So it was a lot of just some solid play for him in his first season in Minnesota. And Steele is best suited, I think, for being a bottom six type player, which is why I think we saw him perform well in spurts with guys higher in the lineup. We saw Steele play on the top line, and for a stretch, that worked out all right. He was holding his own with Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello, but as time went on, production started to nosedive, and I think it just further undersold the fact that Steele just is not a guy that is playable long term in that type of role. Same thing on the second line. He played in spurts on the second line and looked okay for a game or two, but then again saw that production start to curtail. And so he really is a guy who I think is better suited for like a fourth line role as opposed to playing as high up in the lineup as he was. Now, it is interesting because if you look at some of his other underlying statistics, and again, courtesy shout out to Brett Marshall of Sound the Foghorn for his player cards, making things nice and easy to put in perspective. Sam Steele's goals for per 60 of 2.68 was second on the team amongst forwards. His goals against per 60 of 2.25 was 11th. Goals for percentage of 54.41 was 5th. Corsi 4 per 60, 58.26. That ranked 5th on the team amongst forwards. 52.6% Corsi against per 60. That ranked 2nd. And Corsi for percentage of 52.55 ranked 3rd amongst Wild forwards. Now, again, Corsi for percentage is events that happen on the ice, such as shots or events that impact the potential to score a goal. If you're above 50%, it's good. And so the fact that Steele was in the top 5 in all of those categories is interesting, to say the least. Expected goals for per 60 of 2.81, which was second on the team. And so, again, I think you're seeing those numbers higher because Steele played a good stretch of the season with Kirill Kaprizov, with Matt Zuccarello, um, while Ryan Hartman was kind of getting himself figured out. And so he was on the ice with some pretty good players. It's just that consistently it didn't pan out the way that I think the Wild would have hoped. But it is interesting too because you get to the postseason and Joel Eriksson Ek hurt, and so you have Oscar Sundqvist as an option, and we see Sam Steele played in the postseason for the Minnesota Wild to fill that spot of Eriksson Ek. And Steele's numbers in the playoffs, his first time in the playoffs, he had 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points in those 5 games. And, his numbers, by and large, weren't that bad. And so I think the theme for Sam Steele here, his numbers were okay. I think it just further kind of underscores the fact that Dean kept putting him in those spots that maybe were just a little too big for what Sam Steele truly is. If you have him as a bottom 6 guy, maybe more like a 4th line pairing, he's fine. He's a fine player. He did some really nice things at points throughout this season. But if you try to put him in as a top 6 guy, that's not going to work. And so your coaching staff, are you really treating him fairly by thrusting him into those types of situations? In a pinch, sure, fine. But long term, we're going to play him 20 games here. Find a better option, if I'm being perfectly honest. As Brett notes in his evaluation of Steele, Steele ended up being a utility player for the Wild, playing on virtually every line with every single player. He had a stretch with Kaprizov and Zuccarello during Hartman's absence where it looked like his game was finally going to another level, but it eventually fizzled out and he slipped down the lineup and eventually out of it, so far to the point many of us thought he'd be on the waiver wire. That's a thing that I think we all forgot about too, is that, and I remember doing a show discussing it, is he found his way out of the lineup. And like, do you waive this guy? Is he even going to make it to the end of the season? But he is, I think, way more suited for like a 4th line role. But the Wild have players that can handle that, to say the least. So interesting what Sam Steele's future holds for the Minnesota Wild. And on one of our episodes for tomorrow, or for Thursday, I should say, we'll be talking to Dylan Lokes and Aaron Heckman of the Hockey Writers a little more about Sam Steele's future. So we'll discuss that at the end of the show today, and then we'll kind of bounce off that on Thursday. So a lot of Sam Steele chatter here over the course of the next couple of days. We will next get to the letter grades for Steele's performance during the 2022-2023 season. That is on the way after this here on Locked on Wild. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Everydayers can tune in to our episode tomorrow, which will be an evaluation of Oscar Sundqvist. Then we'll move on to the third pairing defenseman. We got a lot of those to get through with John Klingberg, John Merrill, Alex Goligoski, Kalen Addison, Brock Faber. We got a lot to get through there. Then it's the fourth liners and the goalies. Coach and GM as well will also get evals in this process. So hoping to have that wrapped up right about the week of the draft. And then we can really hit it heavy before the NHL draft with some looks at some potential prospects. We'll get a couple of regulars back on to discuss what we could see for the Wild in the NHL draft at pick 21. So that's a little bit of a roadmap as to what we have coming up here the rest of this month. And of course, free agency. Not necessarily going to be an active one for the Minnesota Wild, but we still have plenty to discuss as we navigate through the rest of the offseason as well. So, letter grades for Sam Steele. Let's start on the offensive end. And considering what we saw from Steele, which was a career high in pretty much every category that he previously had, I'm going to also give Steele the benefit of the doubt in the face-off department. Held his own in the face-off department. You want to be, ideally you'd like to be a little over 50%. Some of those elite guys get up to 55, 60%, but 48.7 is not anything to shake your head at. And a 10-goal season for a guy who bounced up and down the lineup. I'm going to give offensively, I'm going to go C+ for Sam Steele for his work here this season. He did some really good things, but he did also have stretches, and we have to accommodate for those as well. He did have some stretches where he really disappeared offensively throughout the course of the season. Now, defensively is interesting because if you look at some of the numbers that Steele put up, he was near the top of the list in terms of Corsi events, but near the bottom of the forward list in terms of goals against per 60. And so defensively for Sam Steele, we're going to go with a C- for Steele. Special teams, he didn't play a ton, but if you look at some of the stats, 51 minutes, 54 seconds of ice time on the power play, which ranked 8th amongst Wild forwards, 3 power play points, which was also 8th amongst Wild forwards, and his power play on ice expected goals for of 6.91 was also 8th. Penalty kill, 58 minutes, 8 seconds, which was 6th. And his numbers on the goals against per 60 and the expected goals against per 60, 13th and 8th overall. I don't think Sam Steele is a guy who should be playing a ton of power play minutes or penalty kill minutes unless there is a dire need. And for the Minnesota Wild, power play 2 ended up fitting that category. But ideally, he's not a guy that plays a ton of minutes on either special teams unit. And so I'm going to go with a C- here. I mean, he didn't do anything, I think, to hurt the team in particular on the penalty kill, but power play, just again, you would like to, in an ideal situation, have better options on the table for your power play as opposed to Sam Steele. So playoff-wise, this is interesting because going into the postseason, the debate was whether or not we were going to get Oscar Sundqvist or Sam Steele. We got Sam Steele. He did score a goal, but just again, like a lot of the guys that were thrust into those bigger roles in the lineup should have been playing further down. And so, do you knock a guy for being put in a position by his head coach that he probably shouldn't be playing in? So I'm going to go again. I'm going to go with the C minus here for Sam Steele, and overall letter grade. Sam Steele was fine. He did, I think, what you expected he was going to do by bringing him in. He was a low risk free agent signing. You do still have his rights going into next season, and so there will be a discussion as to what happens to him. But I don't, I just don't think of the things that went wrong down the stretch. I don't know that you can pin a lot of that on him, again, because of these situations that he was put in to try to help out this team. So I'm going to go with the C minus for an overall grade. Again, not near the top of the list in terms of things that went wrong. For what he is, he was fine. So we're going C minus for overall grade for Sam Steele for the 2022-2023 season. And now the big question becomes, what's next? Does Steele end up sticking around? Does he end up getting traded? Does he stay on as some minor league depth in Iowa? We'll take a look at the cap situation and see where Sam Steele may ultimately end up as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Everydayers can tune in for tomorrow's show, in which we will discuss Oscar Sundqvist and his season eval. A guy who didn't really get a ton of playing time in the postseason, played one game, but a guy who I think did what was expected of him when he was brought to the team at the trade deadline. So we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. We still have a ton of defensemen to get to for those evals, plus the goalies as well. So we'll try to wrap those up here within the next week or two, and then all aboard the Draft Express leading up to the NHL draft. So what's next for Sam Steele? Steele's cap situation. He is a restricted free agent. And so that means the Wilds could try to get something done on a longer term basis. He is arbitration eligible as well. And so you could go that route if you really want to. But here's the thing for me is at this point, you're pretty locked in with Ryan Hartman, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Freddie Gaudreau as centers. And so if you are going to get to a point where Marco Rossi is going to have a role on this team, he's got to play somewhere. And so would you rather see another season of Sam Steele in which he provides some moments, but by and large just looks like a guy who is a probably fourth liner at best? I don't know. And I will tell you, I think there are way bigger priorities on this team than trying to haggle out an arbitration hearing for a guy in Sam Steele that you could find. You can find those guys every offseason. Furthermore, you have guys down in Iowa that could come up and could probably give you somewhere around that in terms of a compete level, a battle level, while also offering some intrigue and some upside. So do you want to give that spot to Sam Steele again this season, or would you rather just open up a spot for a younger player to come up and earn it? Dean Evison developed a lot of trust in Sam Steele, as Brett mentioned in his evaluation of Steele, is that the coaching staff had a lot of trust in him, and as Brett mentions, Steele is a restricted free agent this offseason, and a 28-point campaign with okay underlying numbers will probably garner interest. The Wild might bring him back, but I see them moving on and filling his role internally with the likes of an Adam Beckman or a Sammy Walker instead. That's the appropriate way to play this. What was the Barry Trotz quote? The new president of hockey operations for the Nashville Predators. Give me some guys with some higher upside. You can find third and fourth line guys anywhere. You can find those guys all day. And so I think you see if you can get something from there is bound to be a team that saw what Steele did, saw what he did in glimpses with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, and there are GMs out there that are just dying to take flyers on guys who show a little sizzle. And so I think if you get an opportunity, if you get anything in return for Sam Steele's services, I think you absolutely make the move, because I think it's way more valuable at this point to get a roster spot open, because how many other roster spots are you realistically going to have available for guys to come up and earn? You have your top three line pretty much set. Second line pretty much set. Third line, depending on what happens with Marcus Foligno, it's likely that there will be a spot on that line that is open. And then you have Brandon Duhaime and Connor Dewar on the fourth line. Depending on if Duhaime is brought back, I certainly hope he is. But you're talking 2, maybe 3 spots that are open on this team. And for a guy that ended up sitting in the press box a ton down the stretch, I think the Wild can find a comparable level of compete and skill in the likes of, as Brett mentioned, Sammy Walker and Adam Beckman. I think we should hope that those guys make the roster this upcoming season. And so I'm cutting bait. I am trying to find a way to move him if the opportunity presents itself. If you can find a way to put him on the roster at worst case scenarios, like a 2-way deal to play down in Iowa, or to be like the 13th forward here, maybe you do it, but I don't know. I don't want to tempt the possibility of him finding his way into the lineup and finding a way for Dean to throw him in on the top line or the second line in a pinch. I would rather they let somebody else have that opportunity, because that's one of the gripes, I think, with the coaching staff, is the tendency to find some guys that are like the coach's guys that can fill spots as needed, without even necessarily being able to actually do what is necessary of those spots. So that'd be my preference. Sam Steele had he had a fine season for what he is as a player. And so maybe Bill Guerin can swindle somebody into giving away a draft pick to pick him up and add him to their mix. I would just rather see that happen as opposed to locking him into an extension and expecting that anything is going to change. That's a lot of the problem, is we lock guys into contracts expecting that they're going to be able to just all of a sudden turn into something that it's been proven that they aren't. So, fine season for Sam Steele, but I imagine that it'll probably be a one and done for Steele here in Minnesota. That will do it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. Thank you for tuning in. If this, again, is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we thank you for choosing Locked on Wild and hope that you stick with us through the offseason and beyond. If you're an everydayer who tunes in each and every day of the week, we thank you for tuning in once again today, and we are looking forward to having you back on for tomorrow's episode. You can find us on YouTube and social media, also on your favorite podcast platforms, which include Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and now Sirius XM as well. So make sure you follow along throughout the rest of the off season into next year as well. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.